it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 8 of my 2024 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Oh Nuts stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Cozy Days 6x8 pad. So I'm going to tear off the sheet that I'm going to use as an inspiration for my color palette and tuck it under my cardstock panel. And I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to begin with my squirrels, and I'm going to do them in some grayish tones. So I'm using E70, E71, E74, and E75. I know you guys might be surprised to see me coloring gray squirrels since red squirrels are my favorite animal. But I just thought that the gray squirrels, or rather this grayish, just kind of like a combination between brown and gray, I thought it matched the palette of the pattern paper better than the red squirrels would. So that's why I decided to go with those. I like to color darkest to lightest, so I started with my E77 and began to lay in my shadows on this first squirrel. Since he is facing toward the right, I'm going to do my shading down the left-hand side of the body. I like to keep the face nice and bright so you can really make out those features. So I typically do put my shadows down the back side of my critters or kiddos' bodies. That's just the way I like to do it, but you can do it. There's many different ways to do light source. So anyway, that's what I am doing, adding those darkest shades down the back of the body on the underside of the tail, where the tail is joined up to the body, and then I blend it out with the E74. On smaller critters, you could probably get away with just 3 shades, but for these larger Hello Bluebird images, I really like to use 4 because I just think it gives you more dynamics because you have really light lights and really dark darks. It just creates more contrast. So I blended out the E74 with the E71 and then added a little bit of E70 on the center part of the face where I wanted to keep it the lightest, also on the top of the tail where that would be catching the most light, and brought that a little bit on the belly, and then I blended out the rest of the belly with W00 and W1 just to create even more contrast and give him like a soft gray underbelly. And then I'm going to move on to my second squirrel. This is going to be the female squirrel in my little story that I'm telling in my head. And I'm going to shade her in the same way, but I am going to flip the shadows because she is facing toward the left. So her shadows are going to fall on the right-hand side. So I'm going all the way back behind her body and on the underside of her arms, the underside of her legs, and the underside of the tail, especially where it is curved under. And then again, blending out with the E74. Just making sure to always catch the edge of the previous shade and pull it out so that you get a nicer blend. And then I will come in with the E71 and pull that even closer on the face. Fill in most of the area on the arms and the side of the body, the top of the legs. I just left a little sliver for some extra highlight, and the same on the tail. And that is where I will bring in the E70 and just make sure that I'm doing like little circular motions to break up the edge of the previous color as well. And then once I have all her gray parts filled in, I will also add a little bit of that E70 onto the belly. I'm going to do it on the right hand side this time, and then blend it out with the W1 and the W00. Next, I'm going to bring in some pinks. I'm going to color in the squirrels' noses and give them some rosy cheeks with RV10 and RV11. I also added a little bit of that to the insides of their ears. I am going to come back and change this slightly in a little bit. But for now, the RV11 wasn't really showing up on them, so I did use the RV13 to just darken that up a bit, and then blended that back down in the reverse to soften it into their fur tone. And then for the branch, I'm trying to match the brown that is in that pattern paper for the acorn cap. It's kind of like a dusty, chocolatey brown. So I decided to go with E43, E44, and E47, putting that E47 on the underside of the branch and also on all of the little parts of the branch to give those a little bit of color and make those stand out a bit more. And then I'll blend out the edge of that with the E44, working my way up to the top and adding the highlight in with that E43 because that is where the sun would be hitting it the most. So it would be the lightest part of the tree. So again, I just made sure that that was blended out nicely. I did go back and add a little extra E44 in between. I didn't even bother blending that out though because I had put in a pretty heavy coat of the E43. And then I'm going to use the same tones for the caps of my acorns. And I decided to shade those all on the left-hand side with the highlight on the right. It doesn't really matter. You could do either or. This is just more comfortable for me being left-handed. So I put the E47 on the very left and the bottom edge of the cap, and then blended out with the E44 and filled in the highlight with the E43. And once again, I did go back and add a little bit more of that E44 and just pull that mid-tone out a bit further and then blended back out with the highlight shade. And for the nut of the acorn, I am trying to match the tone of the nut on the pattern paper. So I decided the E30s were going to be the best match. So I pulled out E33, E35, and E37, and again shaded with the shadow on the left and the highlight on the right. And I do think this was a very close match to that pattern paper, so I was quite happy about that. For the leaves, I kind of put those off for last because I had decided what I wanted to do with those. I ended up deciding not to go with what you would normally think of, which would be green. Just because there is no green in the pattern paper that I'll be using, so I didn't want to introduce a color that wasn't there. So I decided to go with pink tones, kind of like a pinky peach tone. I have a large silver maple in my backyard, and when it starts budding in the spring, it actually has very similar colored leaves. They're kind of like this peachy pink tone. It's really interesting. And then of course, as spring continues on, they turn a little bit more like chartreuse, and then eventually they turn green. But I thought I would try to mimic that and that it would match much better with the pattern paper. So I used R000, R01, and R02. And I did go back and add some extra R02 for some contrast. But then when I was looking at everything as a whole, I decided that the pinks that I'd used on my squirrel's cheeks did not match the leaves at all. So I went back over that with the R02 just to kind of pull it a little bit more together. Then I decided to do some dot detail on the leaves to give them a little bit extra interest. So I started to do that with the R02. I liked it, but I wanted a bit more contrast. So next I pulled in the R12, but that really wasn't any darker than the R02. So instead I decided to switch to YR04, which is an orange shade, but I thought it worked well. And it's only in a very small amount with just a couple little dots on each of the leaves. And then once I have those on, I just wanted to soften them a little bit more into the leaf. So I went back over that one more time with the R02 and just kind of softened the bottom part of it to kind of make it flow together a bit more nicely. Once I was done with that, I could trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm starting out with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock that I've trimmed down with one of the Hello Bluebird nesting circles. And I am going to add some Distress Oxide ink to this and create a sky. I'm going to use saltwater taffy and some spun sugar because the saltwater taffy is a little bit too orange and the spun sugar is a little bit too pink to match that pattern paper. But together they work really nicely together, and I think it came to something that really closely resembles that pattern paper. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to add the clouds, and I'm just turning that each time and creating a new cloud formation. And then I start with the saltwater taffy ink and add that a little bit more prominently right on the edge of that stencil to kind of start the clouds. And then I go over it a little bit more softly with the spun sugar. So I ended up doing 4 different cloud formations because this tree branch is going to be up in the sky. So I wanted the whole thing to be clouds. And then I'll just add a little extra ink down at the bottom edge so it matches with the tone of the rest of the panel. I did want to do a little bit of splatter detail on this one just to give it a bit more interest and also kind of tie in with the dots on the leaves. I'm just going to use the saltwater taffy for this. I'm adding that to an acrylic block, mixing in a bit of water to make that more fluid, and then tapping that off the edge of the block with a thin paintbrush to give me small droplets. And then I'll set that panel aside to dry. I wanted to create a little frame around the focal panel to separate it from the pattern paper just a bit in case the pinks don't match just perfectly. So I took the next size up of the nesting decals and trimmed that out of some Lawn Fawn ground coffee cardstock. I'm also going to take the Hello Bluebird My Favorite Words die set and trim part of that out of the ground coffee. It is a 2-part die, so I'll trim the second part out of some vellum. I decided to leave the more intricate part of the die that is cut out of the ground coffee on my mat that goes through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 because it's just a little bit easier to put this die together if you can see all of the letters at one glance and kind of figure out where they are supposed to go. So I'm going to start picking up each part of the die with my EK Success reverse tweezers just to grip a hold of it because they are quite delicate. And then I will add some liquid glue to the back of each letter or each letter section depending on how it cuts out. I'm using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it has that super fine nozzle that really gets behind each of those tiny little letters, and I really love it. It also dries very quickly, so I just have to hold those letters in place for a couple of seconds and then it's already bonded to that vellum. So I just continued my way across, adding each of those letters or like the little apostrophe. And if it wasn't quite right, you do have just a tiny bit of wiggle room to adjust if you need to, but not very long. So I always am just like double checking right away that the letters are in the correct position before I kind of press them down permanently. So this die is a little bit fiddly to work with, but I think the impact of it is really special. I think it just adds something really unique with that second layer. And of course you don't have to die cut it out of vellum. You could do it out of a contrasting color cardstock, whatever you want to do. But I just thought the vellum gave it kind of a soft, dreamy quality that went really nicely with the cloud background, especially since I went with more of like a sunset or sunrise sky with the pinks and peachy tones. I've really been loving these bigger, bolder sentiments lately. My typical go-to is just to stamp something small somewhere on the scene or maybe do a little sentiment banner or something like that, because truthfully, I spend so much more time thinking about the card layout and the critters or the kids or whatever else I'm going to be using for my images. and I don't give that much thought to the sentiment. And then not that long ago, I was thinking, oh, I really should try to incorporate the sentiment more into the entire scene and do something a little bit bolder. And now I have done 6 cards in a row with these larger kind of die cut or partially die cut sentiments. So let me know down in the comments, what is your go-to? Like, do you think about the sentiment, you know, as much as you think about the rest of the design, or is it something that's usually like an afterthought, like in my case? And it's not that I don't care about the sentiment, I really do, because I especially love a good pun. So I do care about the sentiment. I don't know, I love coloring so much. I'm always trying to squeeze as many critters or, you know, images onto the card as I can, which just doesn't end up leaving a lot of space for the sentiment. So I usually just go with something simple and small. But anyway, I have really been loving these larger sentiments lately, and look at that one all put together. I think it turned out beautiful. So now I'm going to go back to my Simple Stories Cozy Days pattern paper pad, and I'm going to flip through and choose one of these plaids. I knew I wanted to go with plaid, but I wasn't entirely sure which one I wanted to go with. But I decided to go with this large, almost like a gingham print. I thought the gray tones in there really went well with the grayish shades that I had colored my squirrels in. So I'm going to pop my card base in my Misty so I can stamp on the inside. I'm using Lawn Fawn craft cardstock and walnut ink. And I'm going to do the squirrel couple from Oh Nuts, but I'm going to use the sentiment from the Hello Bluebird Banner Blessings stamp set that says, "Thinking of you with love." So that way this card can be given as a Valentine card if you want to, but it could also be saved in your stash for any kind of love theme card that you might need one for. You know, I like to build up my stash at this time of the year after I've been depleted after Christmas and, you know, the whole year of card giving. Now at the beginning of the new year is when I like to start building up my stash again and just having cards on hand that I can give, you know, as the occasion arises. So now I want to start filling in my focal panel. So I am going to grab the tree branch image first and make sure that that is on there where I want it. I need to have enough room on top for my squirrels to be able to fit. So I kind of shifted it down a little bit low of center. And I'm going to have the first squirrel kind of walking out on the branch with his arms spread wide. And then the second squirrel is kind of so excited to see the first squirrel coming that she's kind of jumping up in the air off the branch, and she's got her arms spread open wide as well. So I figure maybe these guys have been apart for a little while. Maybe he's coming back from a little journey, and they're just so excited to see each other again. I'm going to take the little acorns that has the 2 together and tuck that on the left-hand side under the leaf there. And then the single acorn I'm going to tuck on the leaves on the right-hand side. And then I'm going to add my squirrels. At first I just use those as a placeholder to figure out the rest of the scene. But now that everything is on there, I can go ahead and commit to where I want them on the card. So their tails are actually going to hang off the edges of the focal panel, but that's okay. I actually like that look. I think it makes the scene look like it's so full of life that it can't be contained within the confines of the focal panel. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I'm going to glue that to the ground coffee circle that we die cut that is just a little bit larger, so it gives it that frame like I said. And then I can start adding on my pattern paper. I've trimmed that down with my paper trimmer to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it fits on the entire front of my A2 standard size card. And then I'm going to take the pink acorn print and add that across the center towards the top of the scene. So I'm just making sure that's on there nice and straight. And then I've added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel. So I'll peel off those release papers and pop that up in the center of the acorn print. Just making sure I have that on there just where I want it. And then I can bring in my sentiment. Now, because that sentiment was going to overlap part of the focal panel and the focal panel was popped up on foam tape, I did have to die cut tiny little slivers of foam tape and hide them behind each of the brown letters. You can see right there I'm adjusting one of those tiny strips because I could see it through the vellum. So before I press everything down into place, I'm just double checking and making sure that there is no foam tape showing. I actually had foam tape where I didn't need it because it was going to overlap the popped up focal panel. So that's something to think about if you're creating a card like this. You may want to just glue your focal panel flat to the card front if you don't want to have to worry about die cutting tiny slivers of foam tape. I did want to add a few hearts to this card because I did want it to be a Valentine or a possible Valentine. So I'm going to bring in some Studio Katia iridescent hearts, and I'm just going to add a sprinkle of those. And so I'm just adding a tiny little dab of my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and then I will use my Studio Katia embellishment wand to pick up those hearts. I'm just using the lid to kind of choose my hearts from. And then I can use the back end of that tool to straighten up the hearts on the focal panel before that glue dries permanently. So I just did a little sprinkle of those until I was happy with how it was looking and kind of filled in some of the empty spaces around the images. I really like these because they're a very subtle detail. They just look like a very soft little pink heart until you tip them into the light, and then they really come alive with that iridescent shine. Speaking of which, I'm going to add a little bit of Stardust Stickles, which also has a similar effect. I guess that's why it's my favorite. I'm going to just add it to the leaves to give those a tiny bit of sparkle. And that is going to finish up this card, so I'll lift that up so you can see all of that detail and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. You know I loved it because I love squirrels so much, but I hope you liked it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I'll also put up 2 more videos from past Valentine Card Series in case you'd like to keep watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!